Ryler Fenn's day started off with a bang, literally. The old reactor in the basement decided to remind everyone why it had earned. He stood at the edge of the bridge, peering into the black abyss where the universe decided to take a holiday, otherwise known as a black hole. Behind him, the clanking symphony of mismatched machinery played a tune only the insane would find comforting. Welcome to the edge of existence, where ship hulls went to die and Voss's crew worked on living. She's spinning faster today, noted Yara Lynx, her hands buried up to the elbows in the guts of a panel. She was the intuitive engineer. Some said she could talk to machines. Others said she'd lost the plot. Both were equally true. Great, Rylan replied, folding his arms. Just what I needed. Another cosmic blender to ruin my morning. Zeke Rome, the ship's philosopher masquerading as a navigator, floated into the conversation like a particularly ponderous cloud. You know, he began, in the way that suggested no one really knew or cared what was coming next, black holes are fascinating, a reminder of life's impermanence. Right, Yara scoffed, wiping greased fingers on her pants. I'll remind you of that when it sucks us in. Maybe you can philosophize our atoms back together. You lack vision, Zeke countered, pointing a finger that looked more accusatory than insightful. But then, Rylan couldn't remember the last time Zeke had been insightful. Black holes are nature's way of keeping cosmic secrets. Yeah, Rylan snorted. Secrets like what's for dinner and who's going to die first. Speaking of secrets, Yara interjected, trying to steer the conversation away from Zeke's cosmic musings and back towards something slightly less likely to induce existential dread. We got a ping from the archive. The archive? Rylan asked, eyebrows raised. In this neighborhood, the archive was either the most boring thing imaginable or the most dangerous. He suspected he wouldn't be enjoying either. Yeah, Yara confirmed, flicking a switch to bring up a holographic display. Looks like it found something old. Fantastic, Rylan sighed. Our last encounter with old nearly disassembled the ship. What is it this time? A recipe for gamma ray soup. Worse, Yara replied, smirking with that perverse engineer joy at impending chaos. A history of a plague, galactic scale, supposedly wiped out civilizations. Plague, huh? Rylan asked. And here I thought my hangover was the biggest threat to the galaxy today. Yara shrugged. Could be relevant. Might explain why everyone hates us. Everyone's hated us since we invented taxes, Zeke added. Listen, if this plague is as devastating as it sounds, it might have something to do with humanity's reputation. Reputation, huh? Rylan mused, scratching his chin. I thought our reputation was the idiots who joke about everything. Well, now it's the idiots who might have unleashed a plague that killed off half the galaxy, Yara corrected, a gleeful glint in her eye. Good to know we've diversified, Rylan said, with a grin sharp enough to cut steel. But seriously, if this plague is real and we explain it, we might just clear our name. Or, get blamed for it. Details, Zeke waved dismissively. What do we do? Dive into the archives, Rylan nodded, knowing full well this was probably a terrible idea. But then his life philosophy had always been do it first, regret it later. Yara, get us into that archive. Zeke, try not to philosophize us to death in the meantime. It didn't take long for Yara to work her mechanical magic. She pried information out of the archive like a surgeon pulling teeth, while Zeke hovered in the background making notes and comments, none of which were helpful. Here we go, Yara said, as the display filled with scrolling text and images. Looks like it started on Terra 9. Terra 9. The place that makes New Detroit look like paradise, Rylan asked. Yeah, Yara nodded. Perfect spot for a galaxy-wide plague to start. Maybe it was the water, Zeke offered helpfully. Yeah, and maybe it was the fact that they considered sanitary a dirty word, Rylan shot back. So, what are we looking at? Initial reports mentioned a viral strain that mutated rapidly, Yara explained. Spread faster than a bad joke at a funeral. And about as welcome, Zeke added. Rylan whistled low. Sounds delightful. Any idea if they contained it? Yara grimaced. Define contain. Didn't wipe out the entire planet. Then no, Yara said with a shrug. They tried. Some genius thought they'd solve it with more experiments. Of course, those experiments got out of hand. Of course, Rylan echoed, shaking his head. Because why not make a bad situation worse? There's something else, Yara said, pointing to a section of the text. Mentions an off-world transmission. Off-world, Zeke perked up. As in they asked for help, or spread it further, Yara replied. Guess which one history supports? I'll bet they asked for help and got left on read, Rylan guessed. Seems to be the galactic standard. Could be, Yara said, eyes flicking over the text. But if this transmission made it off-world, there might be more to this story. More like a cautionary tale, Zeke mused. Don't poke the cosmic bear, Rylan nodded slowly. Okay, so we've got a plague, possibly human-made, that could have spread beyond Terra 9. And a trail of breadcrumbs leading to who knows where, Yara added. Trail of breadcrumbs, Rylan repeated, amused. Hope nobody's planning on snacking along the way. Wouldn't recommend it, Yara grinned. Unless you're into viral gastronomy. Each breadcrumb could be a clue, Zeke said, eyes lighting up with academic enthusiasm. If humanity's to blame, then maybe we're the ones who can solve it. Or at least prove we didn't do it, Rylan said. For once, it'd be nice to clear our name. Given our track record, Yara said, cocking an eyebrow, I wouldn't hold my breath. Rylan took a deep breath and leaned back into his chair, the weight of the thing setting him solidly between a rock and a hard place. All right, team, let's track this plague back to its source. Maybe we'll find a way to turn the tables, or at least a point where humanity didn't screw up royally. Ambitious, Zeke chuckled dryly. And stupid, Yara agreed. Always, Rylan confirmed. But what else have we got to lose? Zeke sighed, resigned but ready. Our dignity, our lives, our place on the ironic pedestal of galactic history. Rylan smirked, a glint of reckless determination sparking in his eye. Well then, let's give the galaxy one hell of a show. Rylan Voss sat slouched in the captain's chair, staring at the dusty remains of the archive interface like it was a relative he barely knew, but was obliged to visit on holidays. You know, I always thought the apocalypse would be more exciting. Alien invasions, robot uprisings, that sort of thing. Not just us getting blamed for a viral hiccup. Yara Lynx tightened a bolt with a wrench that looked older than Rylan's last good idea. Maybe it's all downhill after your first apocalypse. Can't be much worse than the last one, right? Zeke Rome, performing his usual duty of making every conversation feel like an existential crisis, leaned against the wall with all the grace of a dying star. You do realize we can't ignore this, right? The galaxy pretty much wants our heads on platters. Let him try, Rylan shrugged, though his eyes flickered with unease. I ain't losing any sleep over a few galactic death threats. Few, Yara interjected, her voice dripping with the sarcasm she wielded like a scalpel. The last count was somewhere between everyone and everyone plus their dog. Rylan cracked a grin. Then I suppose we should come up with a plan before we end up as cosmic scapegoats. Again, try contacting someone, Zeke suggested, gesturing vaguely towards the communications console. We might as well beg for mercy before they find us. Great, Rylan muttered. I always wanted to practice my groveling. Keep it simple, Yara added, like please don't shoot, we're innocent. Or we're too dumb to do it on purpose, Zeke suggested. Rylan activated the comms, his voice coming over as smooth as gravel. This is Captain Rylan Voss of the starship Vagrant. To anyone listening out there, we're not the ones who started the plague. You probably have us mixed up with someone more competent. The console hummed with static before a voice crackled through, dripping with suspicion. Vagrant, you say? Isn't that the ship linked to the Terra 9 outbreak? Yeah, Rylan replied, but only if you squint real hard and ignore actual facts. Your reputation precedes you, Captain. Why should we believe you? Because I'm begging you to, Rylan said, adding a touch of desperation for effect. Trust me, if I were clever enough to unleash a plague, I'd be somewhere else letting someone else take the blame. Charming, came the reply. We'll put you through to someone who might care. Don't expect much, Voss. The connection ended, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its wake. Yara snorted. "I'm sure that went well. Could have been worse," Ryland said, though the confidence in his voice was seeping away like air from a punctured hull. "At least they didn't shoot us on sight." Zeke scratched his chin thoughtfully. "This archive, you think it holds more than just sermons on why we're doomed?" "Maybe," Yara said, her fingers moving across the console with practiced ease. "I'm betting there's more dirt in here than a politician's inbox." "Well then," Ryland stood up, the weariness in his bones temporarily forgotten. "Let's dig." They huddled around the console as Yara coaxed it into revealing its secrets, the display flickering with lines of text and grainy images. The archive seemed to be a scrapbook of the galaxy's worst moments, a collection of humanity's little oopses. "Look at this," Yara said, pointing to a news fragment. "Reports of a lab on Quarantine 5 could be connected to this mess." "Quarantine 5?" Rylan echoed, incredulous. "Who names these places? Do they want us to avoid them?" "Probably," Zeke mused. "But if it's listed here, it's important, or at least dangerous." Rylan glanced at Yara. "Can you get us coordinates?" "Already on it," she replied, tapping away. "But if it's as bad as it sounds, we might want to say our goodbyes now." "Just in case," Zeke said, as if the prospect of imminent death was a simple fact of life. Rylan let out a sharp laugh. "The odds of us surviving this already feel like I'm cheating death at cards." "What's one more gamble, right?" Yara said, her tone dismissive. "Because relying on luck has worked so well for us in the past." The console beeped to announce a new message, startling them. The screen displayed a stern face, the kind that belonged to someone who'd rather be doing anything else than talking to them. "This is Commander Forsk of the Galactic Council," the face said, his voice a rumbling growl. "Captain Voss, we've received your message. Convince me you're not a threat." Ryland straightened, trying to look more competent than he felt. "Commander, we're as much a threat as a toothless dog. We've been chasing our tails trying to figure out this plague business, and it's only led us to more questions." Forsk's expression was unreadable. "Questions or excuses?" "A bit of both," Rylan admitted. "But if you give us some time, we might find answers. And if we don't, well, at least we won't die wondering." The commander seemed to consider this. "You have a reputation for reckless behavior, Captain. How do I know this isn't just another one of your stunts?" "Because, Commander," Zeke interjected, "even we know there's a time and place for stupidity." "This isn't it." Forsk's eyes narrowed as if searching for any sign of deceit. "Very well, you have one cycle to bring me something useful. If not, you'll be considered hostile." Rylan exhaled slowly as if he'd been holding his breath for too long. "We'll find something or die trying." "Try not to," Forsk said, his face disappearing from the screen. The silence left in his wake was heavy, like the air in a tomb. "Well," Yara broke in, trying to dispel the tension, "that went better than expected." "Low expectations," Zeke chuckled, "the key to eternal happiness." Ryland felt the familiar pull of adrenaline, the kind that made him think he could outrun fate. "Looks like we're heading to Quarantine 5. Any objections?" "Only the usual," Yara said, "like not wanting to die horribly." "Point taken," Ryland nodded. "But if we're going to clear our names, we need to act fast. Zeke, plot a course. Yara, keep the ship together. I'll be in my quarters pretending I have a plan." "Sounds like a classic Voss strategy," Yara quipped. Rylan half smiled, a shadow of his usual bravado. "Sometimes it's all we've got." As he turned to leave, Zeke called after him. "Hey, Rylan, if this is our last run, it's been something?" "Yeah," Rylan said without looking back. "Something." He walked away, the echoes of Zeke's words trailing behind like ghosts. The corridors of the Vagrant were familiar, comforting in their constant state of disrepair. It was home, for better or worse, and he intended to keep it that way. In his quarters, Ryland sat down heavily, the weight of uncertainty pressing against him. The galaxy blamed them for a nightmare they didn't create, but if there was one thing he knew, it was that the universe loved to blame the convenient scapegoat. And Rylan had always been far too convenient. As he contemplated their next steps, a knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Yara stood there, a rare look of sincerity on her face. "You've got that look," Rylan said, waving her in. The one that usually means trouble. Just wanted to say, Yara began, leaning on the doorframe. No matter how this turns out, it's been a hell of a ride. Rylan chuckled, a sound that was more genuine than he'd admit. Wouldn't trade it for the world. Well, maybe a better one. Yara grinned. Let's make sure we get the chance to find one. With that, she left, leaving Rylan alone with his thoughts once more. They were heading into the unknown, as they always did, armed with little more than stubbornness and sarcasm. But Rylan had learned long ago that sometimes that was enough. As the ship hummed quietly around him, he made a silent promise. Whether it was Quarantine 5 or any other hellhole the galaxy threw at them, they'd face it head-on. Because if they didn't, no one else would. The vagrants surged forward into the void, a broken relic carrying stubborn dreamers. They might have been outmatched, outgunned, and outwitted, but they'd never been outdone. Not yet, anyway. As the stars blurred into streaks of light, Rylan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they'd make it through. A long shot, but in a galaxy that offered few certainties, he'd take it. The starship vagrant sputtered through the cosmic debris of the starship graveyard like a drunk trying to make it home after last call. Rylan Voss, perched precariously in the captain's chair, stared at the archive interface as if hoping it would magically reveal all the answers to their problems. It was either that or develop a drinking habit, and he was fresh out of anything stronger than despair. Yara Lynx was hunched over the console, fingers dancing across keys with the fluency of someone who'd long since realized the galaxy was a giant joke at everyone's expense. "Looks like we've got something here," she announced, her voice laden with the kind of sarcasm you could package and sell. "Do tell," Rylan replied, leaning forward like a man about to learn his fate from a particularly untrustworthy fortune-teller. "There's a hidden code buried in the archive's guts, real sneaky-like. It's pointing to some kind of synthetic religion. You know, the kind that promises salvation and delivers a plague instead." Zeke Rome, the resident philosopher of doom, let out a low whistle that somehow managed to sound both impressed and morbidly amused. Synthetic religion, huh? Because regular religion wasn't confusing enough. Just when you think the universe can't get any weirder, Rylan mused, it starts throwing curveballs made out of existential crises. Yara continued to tap away, eyes narrowed as she deciphered the code. Looks like they were manipulating biological data. Could be the origin of this plague madness. "Great," Rylan said, the word dripping with irony. "A cult with a lab. I'm sure that's not a recipe for disaster." Zeke scratched his chin, contemplating the news with the intensity you'd expect from a man whose hobby was unraveling the threads of the universe. "So what do we do about it?" "Figure out where this lab is, for starters," Rylan said, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in his gut that usually preceded things going sideways. "Already on it," Yara replied, her fingers moving like a pianist playing a particularly difficult piece. "Just need to sift through this junk." The ship shuddered violently, cutting off any further conversation as alarms blared. The sound was as subtle as a punch to the face. "What now?" Rylan shouted over the din, gripping the armrests as if the chair was about to launch him into orbit. Zeke checked the readouts, his expression grim. "Looks like the graveyard doesn't like us poking around. We've got a hull breach starboard side." Rylan swore under his breath. "Of course we do. Yara, can you patch it?" "Not from here," she said, already on her feet. "I'll need to get to the maintenance bay." "I'll help," Zeke offered, because what else did they have to do besides not die horribly? "Right," Rylan said, struggling to keep a lid on his frustration. "I'll keep an eye on the archive. Maybe something useful will pop up while you two are saving our asses." Yara and Zeke dashed out, leaving Rylan alone with the archive's dusty glow and the persistent hum of impending doom. He glanced back at the screen, hoping for some divine intervention or, failing that, a clue. The archive flickered, revealing a schematic that looked like it had been drawn by someone who'd never seen an actual lab. Still, it was a lead. Rylan squinted at the coordinates, committing them to memory while praying they wouldn't lead them straight into a black hole. As he sat there, the ship shuddered again, as if reminding him that ignoring problems didn't make them go away. He figured he'd better check on Yara and Zeke before they accidentally turned the situation from bad to lethal. Ryland found them in the maintenance bay, a cramped space filled with tools, wires, and the distinct smell of burnt circuitry. Yara was wrestling with a panel, cursing under her breath in a way that suggested she was familiar with all the universe's most colorful expressions. "How's it going?" Ryland asked, leaning against the doorframe because that was about the extent of what he could contribute at the moment. "Like trying to fix a starship with chewing gum and wishful thinking," Yara replied, her tone as dry as ever. "Give her some credit," Zeke added, handing her a spanner. "At least she's making progress." "Yeah, well," Yara grunted, tightening a bolt with all the grace of someone about to lose a finger. "This ship's held together by spite and duct tape. If we're lucky, it'll hold." Ryland nodded, appreciating their dedication even if it felt like they were rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. "I found coordinates for the lab," he informed them. "Assuming we patch this up, we can head there next." "Assuming," Yara echoed, glancing at the readout that stubbornly flashed warnings in a shade of red that screamed imminent death. "Do you ever think," Zeke said, his voice a low rumble, "that maybe the universe is just one big cosmic joke and we're the punchline?" "Every damn day," Yara shot back, not missing a beat. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the clatter of tools and the occasional groan of the ship objecting to their efforts. It was almost comforting in a way knowing that no matter how screwed they were all in it together. Eventually, the alarm silenced, a small victory in a field of defeats. Yara wiped her hands on her overalls, leaving streaks of oil behind like war paint. "That should hold for now. We just need to avoid any sudden impacts or, breathing too hard." Ryland grinned despite himself. "I'll add that to the list of things to avoid." "Let's get back to the bridge," Yara suggested, "before this thing decides to fall apart again." Ryland led the way, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie despite the looming threat. Maybe it was because they were all in the same sinking boat, or maybe it was because they were the kind of people who thrived on the impossible. Back at the helm, Ryland punched in the coordinates for the lab, hoping it was a lead and not an elaborate trap. The ship heaved as it set course, its engines protesting but ultimately complying. "Next stop, hell," Ryland muttered, watching the stars warp past the viewport. "You say that like we haven't been living there," Yara replied, settling into her seat with the air of someone who'd made peace with the chaos. "At least this time, we might get some answers," Zeke said, though he sounded like he wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Ryland nodded, keeping his eyes on the trajectory. "I just hope they're not the kind that get us killed faster." The journey to Quarantine 5 was mercifully uneventful, if you didn't count the constant threat of mechanical failure hanging over them like a particularly heavy storm cloud. They arrived to find a world that looked about as welcoming as a snake pit. The planet's surface was a patchwork of industrial complexes and containment zones, each one more ominous than the last. It was the kind of place that made you question your life choices simply by existing. "Charming," Yara commented as they began their descent. "I can see why this place wasn't on any tourist brochures. Probably because it's where they test those death by 1,000 cuts theories," Zeke added, his humor as dry as the planet's surface. Ryland maneuvered the Vagrant onto a landing pad that looked barely capable of supporting its weight. The ship settled with a groan of metal against metal, a sound that suggested it had seen better days. "Okay, team," Ryland said, trying to muster some semblance of leadership. "Let's see what this synthetic religion is all about." They disembarked, stepping into an atmosphere that smelled faintly of rust and failure. The facility loomed ahead, its architecture a testament to function over form. It was the kind of place that screamed government facility, with all the charm of a bureaucratic nightmare. Inside, the corridors were sterile and cold, lined with screens that flickered with indecipherable data. The place had an eerie, abandoned feel to it, like a ghost town where the ghosts were still filling out paperwork. They moved cautiously, Rylan taking the lead with Yara and Zeke flanking him. It felt like something out of a bad horror vid, the kind where the protagonists made every stupid decision imaginable. "Keep an eye out for anything useful," Rylan instructed, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling crawling up his spine. "Or at least something that won't kill us." They reached a lab that seemed to be the epicenter of the operation. It was a chaotic mess of equipment, wires, and half-finished experiments that looked more likely to explode than yield any answers. "Well, this is cozy," Yara commented, poking at a console that buzzed in protest. "Cozy like a coffin," Zeke replied, his eyes scanning the room for anything of note. Rylan approached the main terminal, hoping against hope that it would provide some clarity. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of files with cryptic names that suggested nothing good. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding," Rylan muttered, accessing the files with a mix of curiosity and dread. What he found was a tangled web of data, detailing experiments that made his skin crawl. It seemed the synthetic religion had been playing God, manipulating biological data to create a plague that would purify the galaxy. "These people were nuts," Yara said, reading over his shoulder. "Like the kind that think unleashing a plague is an act of divine intervention." "Divine stupidity, more like," Zeke quipped, shaking his head. Rylan felt a chill as he read further. They'd been right about the plague's origin, but this was bigger than anything he'd imagined. If those responsible were still out there, the galaxy was in for a world of hurt. "We need to get this back to Forsk," Rylan said, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on him like a boulder. "And pray he actually cares," Yara added, not optimistic about their chances. They began to download the data, hoping it would be enough to prove their innocence and expose the true culprits. But as they worked, the lights flickered ominously, a reminder that things were rarely simple. "Time to go," Rylan urged, pocketing the drive. "Before this place decides to self-destruct or something." They hustled back to the ship, the feeling of urgency driving them forward. The Vagrant was still intact, a small miracle considering their luck. As they prepared to take off, Rylan wondered if their discovery would be enough. Enough to clear their names, enough to stop a plague, enough to survive another day. But as the ship rose, leaving Quarantine 5 behind, he realized that no matter what happened, they'd done everything they could. And sometimes, in a universe hell-bent on chaos, that was the best anyone could do. The Starship Vagrant was a miracle of modern engineering in the same way a paperclip was a miracle of swordsmithing. Sure, it could get the job done, but only if you didn't expect too much and definitely not if you looked at it sideways. Rylan, Yara, and Zeke had managed to patch up just enough of it to keep the metal beast limping along through the Starship graveyard where it had met its latest misadventure. "Think this heap of junk will hold together for a little bit longer?" Rylan asked, his voice a mix of hope and resignation as he tapped the control panel. "Depends," Yara replied, smirking. "Do you believe in miracles or fairy tales?" "Neither," Rylan said, navigating the ship through the graveyard's dense field of derelict hulls. "But I do believe in dumb luck." "Good, because that's all we got," Yara shot back, casting a worried glance at the growing mass of debris on the screens. Zeke, meanwhile, had taken a philosophical stance on their predicament, or at least what passed for philosophy in his world. "You know," he mused, adjusting the strap of his seatbelt like it'd save him if the ship disintegrated, "it's fascinating how the universe seems intent on screwing us over, almost like it enjoys it." "Maybe it does," Rylan replied, steering around what used to be a cargo freighter. "But hey, at least we're keeping it entertained." The conversation died as they approached the newest source of their misery, an abandoned vessel drifting listlessly in the void, just waiting to be explored or explode, depending on how their luck held. It was the kind of place that whispered danger and promised death, all while luring you in like a siren with a particularly nasty sense of humor. Charming place, Yara said, staring out at the hulking wreck through the viewport. Looks like the kind of spot where you'd find a corpse with a knife in its back. Let's hope we find something more useful than a corpse, Rylan replied, guiding the vagrant to an uneasy dock. Like what? A map to the nearest black hole, Zeke suggested dryly, unclipping his seatbelt. As they suited up for the venture, the tension thickened. It wasn't just the prospect of encountering something unpleasant on the derelict ship that made Ryland's skin itch. It was the ticking clock of the black hole's gravitational pull growing ever stronger, threatening to drag them into a cosmic blender of death. With a final check and a shared nod, they ventured out, mag boots clicking as they crossed the narrow bridge into the abandoned ship. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with a sense of foreboding. The corridors were dark, lit only by the dim glow of emergency lights. Lovely decor, Yara said, her voice echoing in the hollow space. I'm getting a real haunted house in space vibe. Could be worse, Zeke said. At least there's no background music, Ryland snorted. With our luck, it'd be something truly awful. Like elevator music, or worse, personal banter. They moved deeper into the ship, their HUD mapping out a path through the twisted metal maze. The place felt abandoned, but not in the peaceful way. More like the kind of abandoned where you expected something to jump out at you from the shadows. They reached what appeared to be the vessel's central hub, and Ryland got to work on the main console, hoping it wasn't just an elaborate bomb disguised as a computer. The system powered up with a groan, revealing files that had been left to gather digital dust. Looks like someone's been busy, Ryland muttered as he sifted through the data. Busy screwing things up, Yara added, peering over his shoulder. The files contained more than schematics or logs. They held evidence, cold, hard proof, that the synthetic religion they'd been investigating was up to its neck in biological manipulation. It was all there, experiments, test subjects, and projections of the plague's effects. It was like finding a manifesto titled How to Screw the Galaxy Over in 10 Easy Steps. Well, this is cheery, Zeke remarked, scanning the screen. They've really gone all in on the playing God with a side of mass destruction thing. Ryland gritted his teeth. This is what we need to clear our names, but we need to get it back to Forsk and fast. Assuming we don't get turned into star dust along the way, Yara commented, tapping her foot impatiently. They extracted the data onto a drive and turned to leave, but the ship had other ideas. Alarms blared suddenly, the kind that screamed evacuate or die. The lighting shifted to an angry red, bathing everything in an ominous glow that could only mean one thing: imminent doom. Time to go, Ryland said, stating the obvious as they sprinted back the way they'd come. The ship began to shudder, systems failing or perhaps just throwing a temper tantrum. Ryland cursed as they raced across the bridge, returning to the vagrant just as the derelict began to break apart behind them. Punch it, Yara yelled, tossing herself into her seat as the vagrant rumbled to life. Ryland didn't need to be told twice. He slammed the controls and the ship rocketed away, trailing debris in its wake. The abandoned vessel collapsed inward, a silent implosion that took all its secrets with it, all except the ones they'd managed to snatch from its grasp. Nice timing, Zeke said, breathless but grinning like a fool. Yeah, well, Ryland replied, adrenaline making him bolder than usual. I'm not in the mood to get sucked into a black hole today. The vagrant shook as they sped away, the gravitational pull of the nearby black hole a constant reminder that their troubles were far from over. The sense of urgency loomed large, a dark cloud threatening to pour down chaos at any moment. We need a plan, Yara said, her fingers flying over the controls as she checked their trajectory. Preferably one that doesn't involve a last stand. We take the data to Forsk, Ryland said, though the optimism was dimmed by reality. If he's got any sense, he'll use it to stop the plague and clear our names. And if he doesn't, Zeke asked, more curious than concerned. Then we improvise, Ryland replied, though the word tasted bitter in his mouth. They settled into an uneasy rhythm, each focused on their tasks as the vagrant hurtled through the graveyard. The stakes had been raised, the clock was ticking, and the universe, ever the capricious jester, was holding all the cards. "Ever wonder if this is what our parents imagined for us?" Yara asked, half serious as she adjusted their course. "Depends," Zeke said. "Were they delusional optimists or just plain crazy?" Ryland chuckled despite himself. "Either way, I don't think being hunted for a galaxy-wide plague was on the list." The ship's systems beeped, a constant litany of warnings about the nearby black hole. It was a not-so-gentle reminder that if they didn't keep moving, they'd end up as space spaghetti. But as they navigated through the graveyard, a new problem presented itself. A cruiser, larger and shinier than the Vagrant by several orders of magnitude, appeared on their scanners. It was the kind of ship you didn't want to meet in a dark alley or in deep space for that matter. Guys," Yara said, pointing at the screen. "We've got company." "Fantastic," Ryland muttered, eyes narrowing at the display. "Just what we needed." The cruiser hailed them and Ryland answered, hoping for once the universe might cut them some slack. "This is Captain Ryland Voss of the starship Vagrant," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We come in peace." The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of a man who looked like he'd just bitten into something sour. "Captain Voss, you're in restricted space." "Prepare to be boarded." "Restricted, eh?" Zeke mused. "Guess they forgot to put up the do not enter sign." "We're in a bit of a hurry," Ryland responded, aiming for casual but landing somewhere between annoyed and desperate. "Can it wait?" The captain on the screen didn't look impressed. "Not unless you want to be dragged in by force." Ryland sighed. "Fine. But we're on a timeline, and trust me, you don't want to be the reason a galaxy-wide plague doesn't get stopped." The man hesitated, clearly wrestling with protocol versus the potential for chaos. Ryland could almost see the gears grinding in his head. After a moment, he nodded. "You've got 10 minutes to convince me." 10 minutes is all we need," Ryland replied, cutting the connection before the man could change his mind. "Think he'll listen?" Yara asked, her gaze still on the cruiser. Ryland shrugged. "We'll make him listen. Or at least give him something to think about." As they prepared for what promised to be an interesting encounter, Ryland couldn't shake the feeling that they were living in someone else's joke, the kind that didn't have a punchline. And maybe that was okay. After all, as long as they kept moving, kept fighting, they still had a chance. And in a universe where the odds were stacked against them, sometimes a chance was all you really needed. The silence on the bridge was thick enough to slice with a dull butter knife, and Ryland could feel it crawling up his spine like a bad rash. The cruiser sat on their screens, a looming reminder that the universe had a personal vendetta against them. 10 minutes to convince someone whose favorite hobby was probably twirling a mustache and tying damsels to train tracks. Because why not? "All right, team," Ryland said, trying to muster some semblance of authority. "Let's make those 10 minutes count." "Yeah," Yara chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's give a presentation worthy of the most screwed crew of the year award." Zeke leaned back in his chair, arms crossed and a philosophical smirk plastered on his face. "Ever think we're stuck in a perpetual bad day? Like what did we do in a past life? Kick a puppy? Probably something worse, knowing us," Ryland replied, rubbing his temples. "All right, we need to hit them hard with the evidence. No time for niceties." The cruiser's captain reappeared on the screen, looking like he sucked lemons for a living. "Well, Captain Voss, I'm waiting. Here's the deal," Ryland began, launching into the most condensed version of their troubles that he could muster. "We've got data proving a galaxy-wide plague is being manipulated by a synthetic religion." The captain cut him off with a raised hand. "This isn't story time, Voss. We need facts, not conspiracy theories." "Conspiracy theories," Yara piped up. "You think we cooked this up in our basement? We're not the villains in a bad Hollywood." The captain's gaze was unyielding. "What you're claiming is beyond belief, and frankly, it sounds like a desperate attempt to avoid justice." Ryland clenched his jaw. "We have the files. You can see for yourself. If you'd kindly lower your shields and allow us to board." "Lower our shields," Zeke echoed, shaking his head. "Brilliant idea. What could possibly go wrong?" Listen, Rylan interjected, trying to keep his cool. We'll send over the data. You verify it, and then if you're still not convinced, we'll talk about lowering shields. The captain gave a curt nod. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes, Yara whispered, aghast. What is this speed dating? They transmitted the files, the ship's systems working overtime to get it done before the captain's patience wore thinner than a paper suit in a monsoon. Now we wait, Rylan said, trying to sound confident but feeling anything but. Time ticked by at a snail's pace, each second stretching longer than the last. It was a waiting game, and they were playing against a stacked deck with a joker in each hand. The cruiser was a constant reminder outside their viewport, a big shiny boot ready to squash them like bugs. This is why I don't trust authority, Zeke commented. They never listen until it's too late. Don't worry, Yara replied. Once they see what we've got, they'll either help us or arrest us. And who doesn't love a bit of mystery in their fate? Rylan couldn't help but chuckle, though it was more a sound of desperation than humor. If this doesn't work, we might as well start a new religion. We'll call it Outlaws Anonymous. The captain's face returned to the screen, looking a tad less sour but still firmly planted in disapproving parent territory. I've reviewed the data. It's compelling. Glad you think so, Rylan said, a hint of relief seeping into his tone. But, the captain continued, I can't just take it at face value. Protocols demand verification. Which means? Zeke asked, lifting an eyebrow. Which means, the captain replied, you'll follow us to our station where we can verify this data properly. Rylan exchanged glances with his crew. Following you isn't exactly top of our bucket list. How about you escort us to Forsk instead? The captain's lips twitched. Was that a smile or a grimace? Hard to tell. Forsk is not within my jurisdiction, Captain Voss. You'll comply or we'll take you in by force. Yara rolled her eyes. Great. Never meet your heroes, right? They're always out to get you, Rylan sighed. Fine. We'll follow. The captain's image vanished from the screen, leaving the crew to stew in the awkward silence of impending doom. So, we're just going to walk into their lair? Yara asked. What choice do we have? Rylan replied, his voice laced with frustration. We don't have the firepower to fight back, and running would make us look guilty as hell. We already look guilty, Zeke pointed out. Might as well embrace it and see where it leads. Yeah, Yara added with a wry smirk. What's the worst that could happen? We end up in a cosmic prison with a bunch of aliens who think humans are lunch. Ever the optimist, Rylan said, though his mind was racing through contingency plans like a hamster on a wheel. The Vagrant's engines purred as they fell in line behind the cruiser, the ship systems complaining quietly as if they too sensed the looming threat. The vastness of space felt more oppressive than ever, and Rylan couldn't shake the feeling that they were marching to their own funeral. Keep your eyes peeled, Rylan said, more to fill the silence than out of necessity. If they try anything funny, we'll need to improvise. Improvisation, Yara mused, our best skill. Right next to not dying horribly. The voyage to the patrol station felt endless, each parsec stretching out like a bad stretch of road riddled with potholes. The patrol ship remained a formidable shadow, casting a long, oppressive presence that loomed over their thoughts like a storm cloud ready to pour. Inside the Vagrant, tension thickened like an overcooked stew, every creak of the metal hull sounding suspiciously like a prelude to disaster. The crew clung to their consoles, minds racing through every worst-case scenario. Any bright ideas? Yara asked, breaking the uneasy silence. Not unless we can suddenly develop a cloaking device or a penchant for getting lost faster than a tourist with a broken nav system, Rylan replied, his fingers drumming on the armrest. Zeke let out a low chuckle. In a universe that seems hell-bent on chewing us up and spitting us out, I'd say we're doing remarkably well. Remarkably well, Yara repeated, for people who've spent the better part of a year avoiding every kind of cosmic apocalypse. They docked at the station under the watchful eyes of the patrol crew, their ship nestled in amongst a fleet that seemed to sneer at the Vagrant's hodgepodge appearance. Rylan half expected the other ships to cough politely and ask them to park further away. "Remember," Rylan said as they prepared to disembark, "we're here to convince them, not start a war. Speak for yourself," Yara muttered, checking her gear. "I'm ready to start a revolution if it means getting a decent meal." They were escorted into the station, the corridors cold and clinical, every surface gleaming with the kind of foreboding cleanliness that suggested sterility over safety. Their guard contingent, faces set to blank and unamused, hadn't said a word since they'd been roped in. "Nice place you got here," Zeke quipped, earning him a stony glare from one of the guards. "I bet it's hell to clean." The briefing room they were led to was a far cry from the cozy confines of the Vagrant. It resembled a high-tech courtroom, complete with solemn lighting and an air of judgment so thick it was practically suffocating. The captain from the cruiser, now sans lemon-sucking expression, sat at the head of a table that could easily double as a landing strip. "Captain Voss," he said, gesturing for them to sit. "Now that you're here, perhaps we can discuss your situation more thoroughly." Rylan exchanged glances with his crew, each of them wearing expressions that screamed "I'd rather be anywhere else." "Discuss away," Rylan said, settling into a chair that was far too comfortable for the situation. "We're all ears." The captain steepled his fingers, a classic move that never boded well. "Your claims are extraordinary. You understand the need for verification and caution. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, right?" Yara quipped. "I heard that somewhere in a fortune cookie." Ignoring the jibe, the captain continued. "We've begun initial checks on your data, but it will take time. A luxury we don't have if what you say about the plague is true." "Then why are we sitting here?" Rylan asked, frustration bubbling beneath his calm facade. "We should be heading to Forsk." The captain's expression didn't budge. "I'm not convinced Forsk is the best course of action. His involvement with the synthetic religion is questionable." Zeke interjected. "About as questionable as trusting a wolf in charge of a sheep herd." "Exactly," the captain replied. "My superiors are considering alternative options." Rylan felt like he was in a twisted game of chess where all the pieces were rigged to explode. "We don't have time for alternatives," he said, trying to keep desperation from coloring his tone. "Then perhaps you could enlighten us further on how you came by this data," the captain suggested, "and why we should risk further resources on your behalf." It was a classic interrogation tactic. Stall, confuse, and force them to reveal their hand. But Rylan wasn't buying it. Not when the stakes were piled higher than a credit-choked gambler at a craps table. "We're not here to waste anyone's time," Rylan said, choosing his words carefully. "The galaxy is on the brink, and if you don't act now, it'll be too late." The captain's gaze was unwavering, but there was a hint of something, curiosity perhaps. "Then convince me, Captain Voss. Convince me your cause is worth the risk." Rylan took a deep breath. "The synthetic religion has been manipulating biological data for years, creating a plague to keep the galaxy under its thumb. We stumbled onto their plans by accident and have been trying to stop it ever since." "And how do you know Forsk isn't involved?" the captain challenged. "Because he's the only one who can verify this data and compare it with what we've seen on the ground," Rylan replied. "He's got the resources, and he's been investigating them longer than anyone." "You're betting a lot on one man's integrity," the captain observed. "Maybe," Yara said, "but sometimes all you need is one person to tip the scales." Silence stretched across the room like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. Rylan knew they were on a tightrope, and below them lay a chasm filled with uncertainty and danger. The captain finally spoke, his tone cautious. "I'll consult with my superiors. Until then, you'll remain here under observation." "Observation?" Zeke asked, his eyebrows climbing higher than a starship in low orbit. "You mean house arrest, right? Call it what you will," the captain replied, standing. "You're not going anywhere until we have more information." With that, he left the room, leaving the crew to stew in their own mix of dread and frustration. "Well, that went well," Yara said, leaning back in her chair. I'd say we're in deep, but I think we've hit rock bottom. Not yet, Rylan replied, his mind whirring with possibilities. If they won't help us, we might have to take matters into our own hands. Like what? Zeke asked, his curiosity piqued. Stealing a ship and making a run for it wouldn't be the first time, Rylan said with a grim smile. But let's wait and see. Maybe the universe will surprise us for once. Yara snorted. Sure. And maybe pigs will fly out of black holes. They were trapped in a cosmic standstill, their fate hanging in the balance. But if there was one thing Rylan knew, it was this. Against all odds, they'd keep fighting. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out on top. Rylan Voss eyed the clock on the wall, its relentless ticking a constant reminder that time was slipping through his fingers like sand from a shattered hourglass. He slouched in his chair, the creaking echoing in the sterile briefing room full of soul-sucking decor. The atmosphere was about as comforting as a dentist's waiting room, minus the outdated magazines. They'd been left to stew in their own juices, marinating in a thick broth of unease, as the patrol captain and his merry band of bureaucrats deliberated their fate. Yara Lynx, the vagrant's resident code cracker, tapped her fingers on the table like a drummer with a caffeine overdose. You ever get the feeling we're just pawns in some cosmic game of tic-tac-toe? She asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. More like checkers, Zeke Rome replied, leaning back with arms crossed. We don't even get to be the fun pieces. Rylan let out a long breath, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on him. We need a plan, he muttered. Something bold, something that says we're not just going to sit here and let them decide our fate. Yara's eyes flicked up, a mischievous glint dancing in their depths. We could always hijack their comms and broadcast our evidence galaxy-wide. Zeke raised an eyebrow, the corners of his mouth twitching. And how, pray tell, do you propose we do that without getting turned into cosmic dust? Yara's fingers stopped drumming as a thoughtful silence fell over her. The Starship Graveyard, she said slowly, as if each word were a stepping stone across a chasm. That place is full of tech we could use to boost our signal. It's a jury-rigged nightmare waiting to happen. Rylan straightened, intrigue sparking in his mind like a faulty ignition. You think you can actually pull that off? She shrugged, a grin spreading across her face like a cat who'd just found the cream. What's life without a little high-stakes improvisation? Zeke chuckled darkly. Improvisation is just another word for everything's gone to hell and we're winging it. But it's not like we've got a better option. Rylan nodded, feeling a reckless sort of hope bubbling up inside him. It was a half-baked plan, sure, but half-baked was better than no plan at all. All right, let's do it, but we need to be quick and quiet. The last thing we need is to attract attention before we're ready. Yara stood, her eyes alight with determination. Let's go shake the universe by its lapels. Together, the trio slipped out of the briefing room, their movements slick and silent. They moved through the station's corridors, employing the kind of subtlety that only desperation could inspire. Security was sparse, the guards seemingly more interested in maintaining their expressions of indifference than actually watching for trouble. The hangar bay of the Vagrant was a familiar sight. A patchwork of mismatched components and jury-rigged systems that somehow held together like a miracle of cosmic engineering. Rylan appreciated its resilience, especially when he considered how their ship was akin to a space-age Frankenstein's monster. Yara dove into the tech closet, rummaging through cables and circuits like a kid in a candy store. We'll need to cannibalize some of the Vagrant systems, she said, tossing parts over her shoulder with reckless abandon. Cutting-edge sabotage, here we come. Zeke picked up a stray circuit board, turning it over in his hands. You know, in some cultures, this is considered a declaration of war. Rylan smirked. Good thing we're not in those cultures. With a synchronized efficiency that only years of dodging disaster could hone, they gathered the necessary equipment and slipped back out. The patrol station's docking bay opened up before them, a yawning expanse of forgotten vessels and discarded dreams. The starship graveyard was visible through the viewports, a sprawling collection of wrecks and relics floating in the void, like the leftovers of some cosmic buffet. Yara's fingers danced over the control panel, guiding their pod toward the graveyard with the grace of a drunk butterfly. This place is a treasure trove if you like your treasures dusty and full of tetanus. As they entered the field of derelict ships, Rylan marveled at the sheer variety. Battle cruisers, exploration vessels, and civilian transports, all reduced to drifting hulks. It was a graveyard not just of ships, but of stories, dreams, and broken promises. "How are we supposed to find anything useful in this mess?" he asked, the enormity of the task dawning on him. Yara adjusted the scanners, her eyes narrowing with focus. "We look for something big enough to have a comms array, but old enough to be overlooked by your average scrapper." "You mean like finding a needle in a haystack that's on fire," Zeke quipped. "Exactly," Yara replied, unfazed. "But hey, at least the fire's keeping everyone warm." After what felt like an eternity of searching through the twisted maze of debris, Yara let out a triumphant whoop. "There, a Mark Roman IV colony ship. It's got one of the biggest comms arrays this side of the galaxy." Or it did, before it got retired to a life of space limbo. As they approached the derelict vessel, Rylan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows of the graveyard seemed to shift and writhe, as if the ghosts of long-dead crews were staring back at them with hollow eyes. They docked with the colony ship, the faint clang reverberating through their pod like a death knell. The ship's interior was a maze of broken corridors and empty rooms, its walls scarred by time and neglect. Rylan felt a chill run down his spine. "Let's make this quick," he said, his voice echoing in the empty hallways. Yara and Zeke followed, their footsteps a quiet symphony of determination and fear. They reached the comms array, an ancient beast of metal and wires that had seen better days. Yara set to work, her hands a blur of motion. Just a little tweak here, a little snip there. And voila, instant galaxy-wide broadcast capability. Rylan watched, a sense of awe mingling with his anxiety. It was a bold plan, but they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. "All right," Yara said, stepping back and surveying her handiwork with a satisfied nod. "Let's light this candle." With a deep breath, Rylan activated the array. The screens flickered to life, displaying an empty void that slowly filled with the faces and voices of countless worlds. They were all on the line now, waiting for a message that could either save them or doom them. Rylan cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "This is Captain Rylan Voss of the Starship Vagrant. We have evidence of a synthetic religion's manipulation of biological data to create a galaxy-wide plague. We're broadcasting this information to you now as a warning and a call to action. Review the data and see for yourselves. The fate of the galaxy depends on it." The transmission went silent, leaving only the hum of the ship and the thud of their own heartbeats. There was no immediate response, no dramatic shift in the universe's balance, just the quiet, patient waiting for a reaction. "Well," Zeke said, breaking the tense silence, "if that doesn't get us on everybody's space birthday card list, I don't know what will." Rylan chuckled, relief washing over him like a flood. "Now we wait." Yara leaned against the console, her eyes scanning the screens for any sign of a reply. "Think they'll believe us?" Rylan shrugged, the weight of their actions hanging over him like a storm cloud. "Let's hope our luck holds out a little longer." As they prepared to return to their ship, Rylan couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something monumental. They'd taken a gamble, one with the highest stakes imaginable, and now it was up to the galaxy to decide their fate. In the silence of the derelict ship, Rylan felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the moment they'd done all they could. They'd drawn a line in the sand, and come what may, they were ready to face the consequences. They boarded their pod, the engines humming to life as they pulled away from the colony ship. The starship graveyard loomed behind them, a testament to the countless battles fought and lost in the endless void. As they made their way back to the station, Rylan glanced at his crew, their faces etched with determination and resolve. They were a ragtag bunch, held together by hope and a shared refusal to give up. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Rylan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance. The crew of the starship Vagrant drifted silently, the hum of the engines a comforting reminder that they were not, in fact, cosmic dust just yet. Captain Rylan Voss leaned back in his chair, trying and failing to relax. Broadcasting their evidence was a gamble with a capital G, and the universe loved making sure it never paid off. Yara Lynx tapped her fingers rhythmically against the console, her eyes scanning the endless void outside the viewport. Well, at least we threw a grenade into the galactic conversation, she mused. Now we get to see who flinches first. Zeke Rome, lounging in a chair that looked better suited for a medieval torture chamber, smirked. Or who throws it back at us with return to sender written on it. Rylan snorted. If we get a response, it'll probably be in the form of a very politely worded death threat. The tension in the air was almost as thick as the dust in the neglected corners of the bridge. Their broadcast had been sent out into the galactic ether, and now all they could do was wait. They were either going to be hailed as heroes or hunted like space rats. Given their luck, Rylan had already picked out a nice sewer pipe for his new residence. I can't help but wonder, Yara said, breaking the silence that had settled like a stubborn fog. How many of those religious nuts had heart attacks when they saw our broadcast? Probably cheaper than therapy, Zeke added, stretching his legs out. Nothing like a good scandal to bring out the worst in people. Rylan shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Let's just hope they start eating each other before they get to us. The ship's comm system crackled to life, startling them all. Unidentified vessel, this is the Galactic Council's cruiser Celestial Hammer. We have received your transmission. Stand by for further instructions. Yara raised an eyebrow. Celestial Hammer? Really? Who's in charge over there, a comic book villain? Zeke chuckled. Sounds like they're compensating for something. Rylan leaned forward, switching on the comm. This is Captain Rylan Voss of the starship Vagrant. You, got our message then. A brief silence followed, the kind that usually preceded either a commendation or a court-martial. Indeed, Captain Voss. Your evidence has been reviewed, and actions are being taken against the synthetic religious leaders you implicated. Rylan felt a weight lift off his shoulders, only to be replaced by a different kind of pressure. So, what happens now? The voice on the other end was as cold as the void. You and your crew are to be escorted to Council headquarters for debriefing and potentially recognition. Yara's eyes lit up with mischief. Recognition, huh? I've always wanted a medal. Hope it comes with a cash prize. Knowing the Council, it'll be a nice shiny piece of metal and a pat on the back, Zeke said dryly. At least it'll be more than we've gotten so far. Rylan switched off the comm, turning to his crew with a mixture of disbelief and relief. Looks like we're not the galaxy's most wanted anymore. For now, at least. Don't get too comfortable, Yara warned, though she couldn't hide her grin. The universe has a way of slapping you with a new problem as soon as you solve the old one. As the cruiser loomed closer, its hull a gleaming testament to bureaucratic efficiency and overblown budgets, Rylan couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping in. They'd cleared their names, sure, but the galaxy was a big, messy place with a long memory and an even longer list of grudges. The docking procedure was smooth, almost disappointingly so. Rylan led his crew into the bowels of the Celestial Hammer, their footsteps echoing in the antiseptic corridors. It felt like walking into the maw of some great beast, ready to chew them up and spit them out. Inside a room that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought comfort was a dirty word, they met with the Council's representative, a woman whose stern face looked like it hadn't cracked a smile since the cosmic calendar began. Captain Voss, she said, not offering her hand. I'm Commander Saren. You've caused quite a stir. Aren't we popular? Yara muttered under her breath. Rylan nodded, doing his best to appear respectful. "Commander, we've been trying to clear our names and expose the truth. We're just glad someone was finally willing to listen." Saren's gaze was like a laser, dissecting them with clinical precision. "The Council has arrested several leaders of the synthetic religion. Your broadcast forced their hand." "Happy to help," Zeke said with a nonchalance that bordered on suicidal. Saren continued, ignoring the sarcasm. The evidence was irrefutable. The manipulation of biological data for their so-called enlightenment was, in fact, a tool for control and chaos. "Who would have thought?" Yara said, rolling her eyes. "A cult using a plague for power. Next, you'll tell me water's wet." The corners of Saren's mouth twitched, as if tempted by the prospect of a smile. "Your actions have saved countless lives, Captain. The galaxy owes you a debt," Rylan snorted. "I'd settle for not being shot at for a while." "We can arrange that," Saren replied, her tone softening just a fraction. "Your ship will be resupplied and repaired. And the Council will ensure your crew's safety." As the meeting wrapped up, Rylan couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just walked out of a lion's den wearing steak-scented cologne. Sure, they were heroes today, but the galaxy had a way of twisting heroes into villains when it suited them. Back on the Vagrant, Rylan slumped into his captain's chair, exhaustion settling in like an old friend. "Well, folks, looks like we're not gonna be space dust after all." Yara kicked her feet up on the console, looking every bit the cat that caught the canary. "For now, but let's not start a Kangal line just yet." Zeke leaned back, his eyes half closed. "You think the galaxy's gonna change because of this?" Rylan shrugged, staring out at the stars. "Probably not. But maybe, just maybe, it'll think twice before pulling the same stunt." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared experiences grounding them in a universe that seemed hell-bent on chaos. They'd fought the good fight, and for the moment they'd won. But Rylan knew better than to get too comfortable. The universe was like a bad comedian. It always had one more punchline up its sleeve. Yara was the first to break the silence, her voice laced with that familiar sarcastic edge. "So, when do we get our medals and cheesy hologram acceptance speeches?" Zeke chuckled. "Knowing our luck, they'll mail it to us with postage due." Rylan grinned, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the ship's heating system. "Whatever happens next, we've proven we're more than just scapegoats for the galaxy's problems. And now everyone's gonna be watching us," Yara said, her grin matching Rylan's. "Makes you wonder what we'll do next to keep him entertained." Rylan leaned back, crossing his arms. "For now, we rest. After that, who knows? Maybe we can find some other way to piss off the wrong people." They all laughed, the sound filling the bridge with a sense of camaraderie and defiance. The universe might have its vendettas, but so did they. And if the galaxy wanted to throw them another curveball, they'd be ready to knock it right back. With the artificial night settling over the ship, Rylan allowed himself a moment to reflect. They'd face the odds and come out the other side, a little worse for wear but victorious nonetheless. It wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was a damn good start. As sleep crept in, Rylan's last thought was one of wary optimism. They'd survived this far, and as long as they had each other, there wasn't a force in the universe that could keep them down for long. And as the Vagrant drifted through the stars, its crew found solace in the knowledge that, though the galaxy might still be a mess, they'd managed to carve out a little corner of it where they could call the shots. At least until the universe decided otherwise. But that was a problem for another day. The starship Vagrant drifted lazily through the starship graveyard, a cosmic junkyard where dreams went to die and hopes got recycled as scrap. The crew was no longer the galaxy's punching bag, or at least not the main one. But instead of thunderous applause or a ticker-tape parade, they got something else: silence. The kind that makes you question if the universe's cosmic prank was still in the works. Rylan Voss, now a sort of accidental hero, sat on the bridge, sipping what passed for coffee aboard the Vagrant. "Well, we did it," he said, tone heavy with irony. "Saved the galaxy from a bunch of synthetic nutjobs, and what do we get? A pat on the back and told to bugger off." Yara Lynx, lounging in the captain's chair like she owned the place, smirked. Could be worse. They could have given us medals and then spaced us. Zeke Rome, fiddling with a component that looked suspiciously like it might explode, chuckled. Medals are just shiny bullseyes, and the last thing we need is the universe taking more potshots at us. The comm system crackled, breaking the momentary peace. Captain Voss, this is Commander Saren. The council wishes to express their gratitude once more. Rylan rolled his eyes, thumb hovering over the mute button. And what's the galaxy giving us this time? A fruit basket. Saren's voice carried a static-laced hint of amusement. In addition to your repairs and resupply, the council has authorized a discretionary fund for your personal use. Yara whistled, impressed. Look at that. Galactic hush money. Who says crime doesn't pay? Rylan shook his head, half smiling. As long as it spends like real money, I'm not complaining. Saren continued, her tone businesslike. The galaxy will watch your next moves closely, Captain Voss. You're no longer just a thorn in our side, but a potential asset. Asset or liability, Zeke mused. Guess we'll see which one pays more. After the call ended, Rylan stood and stretched, feeling the tension in his muscles ease. So, what now? Do we stay here and see what other derelict treasures we can dig out of this graveyard? Yara shrugged, her eyes drifting to the stars beyond the viewport. Might as well. We've got time, space, and a ship that's not actively trying to kill us for once. Zeke nodded, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Might be interesting to see what we can cobble together out here, make the Vagrant more than just a flying death trap. Rylan considered this, the idea of a new beginning taking root despite his usual cynicism. Yeah, maybe. Or we could just find a nice quiet planet and open a bar. I hear space booze is always in demand. Yara chuckled, kicking her feet off the console. We'd clean up, especially with our winning personalities. The notion hung in the air, absurd yet appealing. For a brief moment, the bridge felt less like the cockpit of a starship and more like a corner dive where old friends met to spin tales of improbable heroics. As they settled into the surreal normalcy of their post-heroic life, they couldn't help but reflect on what it meant to be human in a galaxy that treated the species as a cosmic afterthought. Think humans will ever be anything more than comic relief to the rest of the galaxy? Yara asked, her tone thoughtful beneath the sarcasm. Rylan leaned back in his chair, gazing out into the void where stars flickered like distant, mocking eyes. Doubt it. We're good at surviving, though, and laughing in the face of catastrophe. Zeke grinned, leaning forward to tap a few keys on the console. And if the universe keeps giving us lemons, we'll just make some damn strong lemonade. With a shot of space rum. The graveyard's quiet was almost comforting, a reminder that in the vastness of space, even a patched-up hunk of metal like the Vagrant could find a place to belong. It was a place where broken things had a purpose, and where the crew could ponder what it truly meant to be human amid the stars. As the Vagrant floated among the wreckage of cosmic history, Rylan and his crew found themselves pondering not just their survival, but their place in the grand scheme. It was a universe with a twisted sense of humor, and they were only just beginning to understand the punchline. A few days later, Zeke was still tinkering with the ship's systems, trying to coax a little extra life from the old girl. Yara was busy scanning the graveyard for anything useful, a pastime that had become surprisingly rewarding. Who knew that scavenging dead starships could be more lucrative than smuggling? Found anything good? Rylan asked, peering over Yara's shoulder at the screen filled with blips and data streams. Some old tech that might fetch a pretty credit, she replied, her voice tinged with excitement. And there's a derelict not too far from here that looks promising. Rylan raised an eyebrow. Promising as in full of useful stuff, or promising as in likely to explode if we poke it? Yara grinned. Both, probably, but that's part of the fun, isn't it? Zeke joined them, wiping grease from his hands. If it doesn't blow up in our faces, I'll consider it a win. Rylan chuckled, appreciating the camaraderie that had grown between them. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making something of their own in a galaxy that rarely offered second chances. The Vagrant eased closer to the derelict, its sensors probing the lifeless hulk for anything worth salvaging. The thrill of discovery, even among the bones of forgotten ships, reminded them that they were more than just the sum of their past misfortunes. "Looks like it's got some decent shielding tech," Yara reported, her fingers dancing over the console. "Might be able to retrofit it to the Vagrant." "Let's see what we can do," Ryland said, feeling a spark of optimism. "If we can patch her up enough, maybe we'll even outrun our bad reputation." They worked together to strip the derelict of its remaining treasures, a task that proved more rewarding than they dared hope. With each piece of salvaged tech, the Vagrant became less a relic of past failures and more a testament to their resilience, and their refusal to be anything less than they could be. Later, as the crew sat around the mess table, sharing a meal cobbled together from rations and imagination, the conversation turned to the future. "So, what's the plan?" Zeke asked, his tone casual but his eyes keen. "Stick around here or head out into the great unknown," Yara shrugged, spearing a synthetic vegetable with her fork. "I'm good with either. As long as we're not running for our lives, I call it a good day." Ryland considered the question, the weight of leadership sitting comfortably on his shoulders for once. "Guess we could do a bit of both. Make the Vagrant the toughest little ship this side of the galaxy and see what adventures we stumble into." The idea had merit. There was a freedom in embracing the uncertainty of space, in facing the unknown not with fear, but with a grin and a ready quip. "So, we rebuild, keep our heads on straight, and make sure the universe knows we're not just some easy target," Zeke said, raising his glass in a toast. Yara clinked her glass against his. "To making trouble in style. And maybe even getting a little respect along the way." Ryland raised his own glass, a smile tugging at his lips. "To the Vagrant. May she stay in one piece long enough for us to see just what kind of trouble we can stir up." The toast rang hollow in the empty corridors of the ship, but it carried a conviction that resonated with each of them. They weren't just passengers in the galaxy's grand drama, they were participants, determined to carve their own path despite the odds. As they settled in for the night, the Vagrant drifted through the shadows of the graveyard, a testament not to what had been lost, but to what could still be gained. The universe might have its own plans, but for now, the crew of the Vagrant was content to chart their own course. In the silence of space, the ship and its crew found a measure of peace. Amidst the chaos and the cosmic jokes, they discovered something far more valuable than medals or accolades. They'd found themselves and each other. And as the stars watched with their indifferent gaze, the Vagrant sailed on, ready to face whatever came next with laughter, defiance, and a healthy dose of snark. After all, they were human, and that was more than enough. 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 Enough.